So, Razan, we had an amazing conversation earlier. Let's pretend we're having the first one of the day again today. Um, Tell us a little bit about what it was like to be the high-level champion for COP28. And please do share what were some of your, not just prime objectives, but also prime responsibilities in the lead up to COP and during COP itself.
Good morning, everyone. Wonderful to be here. Wonderful to be in this incredible city of Expo City and, of course, in Dubai. And we must remember that the historic UAE Consensus didn't happen in anywhere else, but it happened right here. And one of the messages that I wanted to convey before I perhaps respond to your question is really the importance of space, place, and time, and the ability that Expo City was able to really leverage the fact that it was a sandbox, as you aptly described it. It was a place that brought people together. It was a place that broke barriers. You know, we talk about conferences and the conferences of the parties, and we have these images of government officials and negotiations, but we know ultimately that real action happens in the real economy. And Expo was able to break these barriers and bring non-party stakeholders together with, and also showcasing the technology, the abilities, the aspirations of real people. And that, to me, Your Excellency Reem, was the magic factor that resulted in a historic consensus. My role is exactly that. The UN high-level champion role was conceived actually in Paris and through the Paris Agreement. And the idea was climate change is a complex existential topic and cannot be addressed by governments alone, cannot be addressed by a single country, but it needs a groundswell of support from non-party stakeholders, which is UN speech for businesses, investors, universities, people, women, indigenous peoples. So my role was to be that and help bring these two players, but they're much more than players, their whole world together, and to demonstrate that action can really happen. And so for me, COP28, with everybody's support here and with the aspirations of the non-party stakeholders, was able to deliver a number of things. First and foremost, against all odds, and in the UAE and at Expo, and it took 28 years for the world to do this, we agreed that we are going to transition away from fossil fuels. This was so significant. The other thing was this congruence of issues and topics. We recognized, again, globally, that we can no longer isolate complex problems and deal with them in isolation. And as city mayors and those that have worked on complex problems, you recognize that this is essential. So the UAE Consensus recognized that nature conservation and climate action can no longer happen in isolation. And lastly, UAE Consensus was about possibility, and it was about people, really putting people and cities at the forefront of climate action.
So if I were to extrapolate what you said about putting cities at the forefront of climate action, and here I'm looking for an endorsement, do you see Expo City Dubai as a template of such a city that really does bring to the table different stakeholders that would naturally not be together? Because it isn't so often that you would have academics and venture capitalists and entrepreneurs and government decision makers all in the same locality. In your travel, and I know you've done significant travel in the prep to COP, do you see value and maybe urgency in bringing these stakeholders together? And if so, what would you then advise us, me, those that are here, about how we could really use the city as a catalyst for the climate action that you spoke of?
No doubt in my mind that, and we've already spoken that most of the world's population will be living in cities. When we speak about climate change, biodiversity loss, those existential challenges that are facing all of us, facing humanity, we know what the transformations that are required. I spoke about this before. We talked about transitioning away from fossil fuels, but it's more than that, because it's not just about the supply, but really the centers of demand. And where are the centers of demand? It is our cities. And so cities are an embodiment of how we can live sustainably, because it's about transportation, it's about the built environment, it's about food, it's about water. So where else can you look at these topics in a truly multidisciplinary way? I have yet to find another sandbox that actually, truly and authentically, because you have to. When you speak to mayors, when you talk to heads of municipality, they don't deal with climate change one day, water the next, weather patterns the third day. They have to deal with all of these things together. The other thing is also about scale. The most elegant solutions are solutions that address a complex issue through multi-solutions. You don't just talk about, okay, let's put a solar panel on the top of our buildings, but you think about, actually, hang on, it's not about the supply again, it's also about demand. So how do we reduce emission? How do we reduce our consumption? But then hang on, how do we make our buildings more efficient? But then hang on, there are people living here. How do we make it a much more healthy environment? So these elegant solutions are often multi-layered. And a city, and specifically Expo City, is an embodiment of what we need to see in the world moving forward.
And Razan, tell us a little bit about the report that you're launching today and its significance, and why we should all pick it up and make sure we also read it.
Please pick it up. This is and I have to say, this is a true example of collaboration between many developers in the UAE. This is something that we also want to provide as a launch pad for not just developers in the UAE, but also the region. And it really focuses on three key topics. So what are the challenges that the built environment, that the developers are facing today? We are looking at what are the technological solutions that exist today and that are needed to be scaled up, but also being very honest and transparent on what are the policy barriers that are really standing in the way. And when we have mass, when we have critical mass of developers, of those that are truly engaged in the built environment, we are able to express a very unified position on what is required. And so I'm super excited, not just about the content, but the values that this report will bring. Really, the value of true collaboration, multi-layer solution thinking, and the fact that this is going to be launched from Expo, but really, as you said, to the world.
Just as you were speaking about a multi-layered solution-driven approach, I think now more and more, and we saw this in the pandemic, you can no longer find the way to respond to A is by applying B. It is far more complex. There's so many more layers. And I think the intelligence and the genius is going to be in how you can have one intervention apply positively on so many different levels, which is also a testament to how we need to keep things simple but not simplistic, because life is much more complex and things are far more interrelated. So I think in addition to it being how we address climate, I think it's also how we address challenges in the 21st century. And it is important that we stay very mindful of that. As a lot of you know, and some of you here are also developers, and we are now developing the rest of the city to also become a home for people to live in. We are master planning, but we're also exploring the very questions that you asked and really studying how is it that you build up and scale out a city in a way that still holds true to the principles of how it was formed or how it was designed and envisioned, but in a way that will address the problems of the future that we're also conscious and cognizant of. And I think, and I played a much, much smaller role in COP28 than you have, but I think there is a recognition globally that that countries or member states are recognizing that they must embrace that complexity and that multi-layered nature, because you can't actually pick things out as easily anymore. And so in that context, how are you looking at COP29? Because I know that that's something we're going to be involved with as the United Arab Emirates as well.
So first of all, from a woman who hosted the most historic COP, for her to say that she played a very small role is a huge understatement, and I hope that you can join me with an applause for the incredible, incredible, incredible work that Her Excellency played. And as you've heard, does it with such incredible humbleness and modesty, but also inclusion. And I think that's another word that I'd like to really stress on. And inclusion was really practiced at COP28. We had more participants from non-party stakeholders, from the private sector, from indigenous peoples, from women, than any other COP. And I know that was really the true ingredient for success. The other thing was the sense of urgency. We are truly living on borrowed time. In the most simplistic way, we are consuming more than twice what the earth can actually regenerate. We are spewing into the atmosphere more than the planet can actually absorb. And they have consequences. And the consequences are not a tomorrow's prediction. It is a today's world. Climate change is already happening. It is affecting more than half of the world's population. And Reem, almost exclusively, the world's most vulnerable, and it's exacerbating already social and economic inequality across the world. The natural world is in the same state of crisis. More than half of the world's species are under the threat of extinction. And so we do have a huge legacy at COP28, because the world finally agreed that this is something that we will collectively work on. It shed the hats of global north, global south. And that was really big. But what we need to now do, moving forward, at COP29 and beyond, is make true to our collective word. Right now, this is the decade of implementation. The UAE Consensus clearly charts the way, puts clear targets on renewable energy. It puts clear targets on nature. We need to stop deforestation by 2030. It also goes on to the how. But now we need to also chart the way. And the way is about values. And I truly believe It's about culture. And cities today are an embodiment of our culture. Because if you think about the global transformation that are required, renewable energy, food, those are really two of the very, very, very important levers on both climate and biodiversity. They need to be underpinned by a cultural, almost reawakening that recognizes that we are living on borrowed time and we need to be able to move on. And the good news is the technology is there. The policy needs to get there, but it will get there. The urgency is there. And so really, really, we have no excuse at the moment, in my view. We really need to act. And our focus moving forward is to act.
I'll share a personal story, if that's okay. We traveled to Brazil together a year ago. Feels maybe less, maybe 8 or 9 months ago. And one of the things that really astounded me about Razan, because she spoke about inclusion, was how she would and how she did. And this is how COP28 ended up manifesting, bringing in the Indigenous community to the table and sitting with them to not only talk to them about COP, but much more importantly, listen to them about what their and how their ecosystem has changed over time. And I think that's probably a very non-traditional thing to see at COPs, to see the Indigenous community actively participating alongside member states / negotiators / also private sector. And I want to share the story because inclusion is a word we are always using. But when we bring it to real life practice, what you see in inclusion is a great amount of desire to learn. And everybody thinks they're the smartest guy in the room. Not many of us think, well, maybe I could learn something from this community that have been doing it for thousands of years. Well, the truth is nobody is the smartest person in the room, and we actually all need one another and must learn from one another and really include this community alongside other stakeholders as well, the younger generation, et cetera, as part of the mix. And I wanted to highlight this piece because I think you should also be aware that for the first time, and Razan didn't say this as clearly, but COP28 put a stand on nature-based solutions. And that's something that she's also almost single-handedly led for a while until it actually crossed the line. So the notion of addressing climate change by looking at nature, as logical and common sense as that might sound to all of us, actually didn't take a front row in many past COPs. And so as you leave today, and we only have another minute or so, and I'll leave the final word to Razan, to Her Excellency Razan. We must change our modus operandi because our world is changing in ways we don't even understand anymore. And Razan's given us a few examples of that. And you will find in this city, but also in this country, the intellectual agility and desire to grow and change and learn. And that is not a common thing. And it's certainly a privilege to have been able to serve in that capacity, and certainly a privilege to have been able to join her in her COP28, in our collective COP28 journey. Razan, you have the final word. Thank you for being with us.
So I'll conclude perhaps with three key learnings that I had from COP28. One, that as we talk about climate action, we must recognize that it is actually complex and it's not easy. Otherwise, we would have done it already. And the second thing is, with that recognition, we need to come together and learn from each other and truly embrace this multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral approach. Governments and states also need to listen to non-party stakeholders, because we are the practitioners that are trying to implement government policies on the ground, or the lack of government policies. But to have this open and transparent and truly conducive discussion that is not judgmental. You're not doing enough, or you're doing too little, or this is greenwash. Yeah, there's going to be greenwash. And yes, some people aren't doing enough. But there are also the realities of a very, very complex problem, and the implementations aren't straightforward. But what is straightforward, and which was, in my view, very obvious, but it didn't happen in Paris, it didn't happen in Glasgow, it happened in the UAE, and that I'm incredibly proud about, is that nature is an ally. And you see that around Expo. I mean, I remember speaking to the folks working on Expo about this notion of biomimicry, of how do we look and learn from nature? But really embracing nature as a climate action tool, but also as a tool that will eventually and essentially be our baton for social equity and justice. And so from what I learned from the indigenous people's wisdom is, I talked earlier, and I'm going to, sorry, going way over my time allocation. We talked that we needed 2 global transformation. We wanted one on energy and we wanted one on food. But the third transformation that we need is actually a transformation in how we relate to nature. And so this is something that I truly learned from indigenous peoples, who, of course, Reem, you know this, they comprise less than 5% of global world population, but yet they're not paid for this, but they protect 80% of biodiversity. I mean, it's just incredible. And so for them, we must transform our relationship with nature to a relationship that conserves, that restores, but acknowledges that we are part of nature. We're certainly not above it. And the parting words that one of my dear sisters from Chad, Hindu Ibrahim, said to me that, actually, nature will heal if you let it, but it will thrive if you enable it. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's truly work together and let nature thrive, because its destiny is truly intertwined with ours. Thank you.